Okay, so welcome everyone to this episode of Event Insights, our first one of the year. So welcome back to those of you who've come before. And I'm Chrissy, I'm head of content with Safe Events. And joining me today, I have Áine May Hughes. So Áine is the sustainability coordinator with Native Events. Native, as it is, are known, especially in Ireland, for their work in sustainability within the events industry, with festivals and various different kind of culture events. So really excited to see what kind of conversation we have coming up here. And Áine, I will pass it over to you.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Chrissy. Hi, everybody. Thanks for joining today and taking time out of your very busy work schedules on this lunch break. Really looking forward to sharing a little bit of information with you guys about the role of festivals, events, and tackling climate change, sustainability in the Irish events industry in general. As Chrissy mentioned, that's kind of our focus. And then those essential skills and tools, resources and case studies that we can kind of chat about on sustainability to get us thinking about how this can relate to us and our roles day to day in our jobs in events. So I'm just going to share my screen now, and Chrissy, you can let me know when you can see it.
Yeah, that looks perfect, Áine.
Perfect. Okay, Graf. So so welcome everybody for those who are still joining. My name is Áine May Hughes, as Chrissy said, and I'm from Native Events. Native Events, we believe that arts practices and events and cultural activities in general can ignite imaginations for societal change. So I'm just going to give you guys a little bit insight about myself and how I kind of got into this space to start. So as Chrissy mentioned, I'm the sustainability coordinator at Native Events. I've been with Native Events now for about 5 years, back when we were a startup. And I suppose my interest in festival events kind of spiked when I was in my teenage years. I was going to a lot of festivals with my dad and my family and my friends. And I'd been going to them from a very young age with my mum as well. She's a singer. And I suppose I kind of really fell in love with event management and bringing people together and celebrating and culture and art and music. And when I went to Oxygen with my dad in 2010, I remember just being totally baffled by this gigantic city, for want of a better way to describe it, but also the insane levels of waste and destruction that I was seeing. Like, it was chaos. And it was kind of in those later years of Oxygen where things were starting to change. And so I went on to study event management for my undergrad, and again, kind of realized that there wasn't a huge amount of conversation around climate change. There wasn't a huge amount of conversation around sustainability. And I ended up doing my research and thesis on the drivers and barriers for event organisers in the industry, spending a lot of time with my head buried in Megan Jones's Sustainable Event Management book, which I think is on its 4th edition now. Which was the only kind of piece of academic research I had at the time. So I was really struggling to find academic research on sustainable event management. But little did I know that there was actually quite a lot of industry work already going on. And that's how I led to meeting Michael Sorrow, the founder of Native Events, and starting to work with Native Events. And so what we do at Native Events is a combination of 3 things, and I sit across kind of all of these, would be sustainability consultancy, event production for festivals and events of all different sizes, including conferences, music festivals, and then event equipment hire. So the consultancy really kind of looks like working with arts organizations and festivals on carbon footprints, on producing resources for the industry, looking at climate action policy and strategy. The production side of what we do is anything from a build for a conference to a music festival to small kind of off-grid events for Climate Action Week and Quill to Nature. And then our equipment hire, which is a really exciting and interesting growing side of our business, is the renewable energy side of what we are doing. We also do infrastructure like upcycled furniture and things like that. But this is a really exciting thing that we're moving into at the moment. We've just partnered with a company called Watson, and you'll see here there are some batteries, and these are the Watson batteries. And it's incredible to be able to offer renewables to the industry and to see the growing demand in this space. Another part of Native Events, just to touch on before I get into things today, really is Julie's Bicycle Europe. So I don't know if people on the call will have heard of Julie's Bicycle, but Julie's Bicycle are a creative climate charity in the UK, and Native Events are fortunately partnered with Julie's Bicycle and started Julie's Bicycle Europe. So this is, I suppose, a company that kind of partners with Native on the consultancy side of things, working with organisations like the Arts Council in Ireland around their climate action policy, and European projects like the Green Circle project, which is with Erasmus+. And those two projects for us have been really, really key, I suppose, with the Arts Council. I'll talk a little bit about this more later. It's kind of pushing for sustainability requirements in the industry and making sure that our public bodies have really strong policies and implementation plans going forward to support the industry. So before I kind of get into the whole thing, I just wanted to talk a little bit about why we are here today. I find it's kind of important to ground ourselves. There is a reason that my job exists, and there's a reason that my job shouldn't exist. And that reason is that, you know, we are in a climate crisis. And that is a global and a local thing. So the Irish climate is to become unrecognisable if action on emissions is not taken. And so why kind of is this happening, I suppose, to touch on very briefly. And a lot of us know this already, but as I said, it's really important to ground ourselves and why I'm here talking to you today. But human activities, principally through emissions of greenhouse gases, have unequivocally caused global warming, and 97% of scientists agree with this. So, you know, the global greenhouse gases have continued to increase, and through the likes of energy use, and land use change, lifestyles, patterns of consumption, and production. And it's very important to note, and I'm sure a lot of you will have seen this in the news, that last year we saw our first year above 1.5 degrees C. Global temperatures, and with it the destruction and chaos and risk to life that came alongside that. And where all these emissions are coming from, as I mentioned there, just in terms of percentages, is 73.2% from energy, 18.4% from agriculture and land use, 5.2% from industry, and 3.2% from waste. So you can see there the big thing that we need to tackle is energy. And these photos will not be unfamiliar to you. And it's difficult with the devastation that we're seeing and at the scale, because there is this little feeling of kind of, it's happening so often now that we often don't pay attention to it. And things that happened recently kind of feel like they almost happened ages ago, you know, in relation to the Californian wildfires at the start of this year, the extreme rainfall that we had in Spain, which led to the loss of many lives. And then even closer to home with flooding in the south of Ireland. So this is just a little map, I suppose, of the kind of really severe weather events that have been happening around the world, and they are likely to continue to increase without a reduction in emissions. The other side of this, of course, is the biodiversity crisis and nature crisis. And this is looking at ecosystems collapsing and falling out of balance and affecting all life on Earth. And in particular, it's going to disrupt our food systems. And this is as far away as the Great Barrier Reef and as close to home as the Curlew. I think it's really interesting when you break it down, and going back to, I suppose, those key human activities there. Like, yes, energy use is at 73% in terms of global emissions, but we cannot forget as well about land use change and land improvement, and how this can, I suppose, destroy different ecosystems. You know, we're talking about the decline from about 5,000 breeding pairs in the 1980s to as few as 130 breeding pairs, 97% in 20 years. And it is frightening and it is upsetting. So that's a little bit of grounding as to why we're here today. That is not unfamiliar to anyone, I hope, because I think everyone knows how severe the situation is. But we're taking this time now to kind of talk about how this relates to us in our roles, in our day-to-day. Where do events kind of come into this, you know, global challenge of our time? And so to adapt and mitigate, you know, further climate breakdown, every economic sector must move as quickly as possible to reduce emissions and impacts. And events are definitely not excluded from this. And in terms of the direct and immediate kind of impact it's having on events, we're seeing this already. So, you know, you'll probably remember the Taylor Swift concerts in Brazil that were postponed due to the death of a fan, which was absolutely horrific and devastating. And then multiple festivals around the world, which have been cancelled due to extreme weather events. And you'll remember, I'm sure, Burning Man being underwater, not quite the typical imagery you would see there. And one of the other, I suppose, things to note is, again, this is happening really close to home. So July 2023, we had the wettest July on record, and we actually had severe flooding at Body and Soul Festival where I was working, and we had to call a show stop for the first time ever. A lightning storm essentially went over the festival. There was major flooding. It was amazing to see how the audience adapted and responded to this, but from an event control perspective, from a safety perspective, there are questions about like how ready we are as an industry and how prepared all of us are within our various roles to respond to extreme weather events in the immediate kind of sense on the ground. And so thinking about events and festivals and how this is relevant to them, we need to understand that the action that we need to take is global, national, local. So that includes events. And when you think about it, events and festivals are kind of like little microcosms of our society. They're like towns and they're like cities that we build. And I'm aware that I'm talking a lot about greenfield sites throughout this, but I'm pretty sure like we're very much able to adapt this as well to conferences and venue-based events too. We need to address our energy usage and move to renewables. We need to change our production and consumption patterns, moving towards a circular economy. We need to look at our lifestyle and consumption and our cultural influence that our events and festivals have. And something that I often like to touch on here with events and what's really unique for events and festivals in particular is that unlike an organization that has fixed infrastructure like a building, events and festivals are temporary. So we have the opportunity to accelerate change a lot quicker. We can change suppliers, we can demand better, we can move things, we can move sites, we can really change, I suppose, at a completely different rate to a fixed organization. And we need to take advantage of that and lead the way. So one of the ways that we can start to think about our roles and how we can do this is by framing it within the spheres of influence. And this is something that we like to do through a lot of the work at Native Events. We need to look at what we can control in our actions and in our events day to day, what we kind of influence. So all of those people that we're interacting with, an organization, sponsors, partners, how are we influencing them and what they control and the decisions that they're making? And then that final sphere of the behaviors that we're influencing. So this is talking about looking at the systems that we put in place for the staff and the attendees in the audience and how they interact with that and how that really affects their behavior. And it's interesting because I think, again, I'm conscious of, this being an event insights with safe events. I think with crowd safety, you're often looking at the psychological kind of effects of people walking into an event space. But often it's not really thought about in terms of sustainability and people's behaviors from a climate action perspective. And it's something that we can start to do. So to reframe this again, just with inside of an event and to make it a little bit more event specific, that kind of inner core of the sphere is the production itself. That next part of the sphere is your supply chain. It's all of those things that you're affecting. And then that third part, as I said, is the audience. We really need to understand what kind of behaviors that we are encouraging through our events. And to kind of back up what I'm saying here, and the importance of events and festivals from a sustainability and a climate action point of view, culture and its role in climate action has been recognized by the UN. And this started out at COP27. So this is the Conference of Parties. It's the supreme decision-making body of the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change. And it was recognized there that there's been a real lack of focus on socio-cultural enablers in climate action. And the aim now is to kind of create a work plan on culture under the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change for the next COP, which is COP 2030 in Brazil. This has been a very kind of pivotal moment in shining a light on culture and its role, I suppose, in creating that behavior change across society that we really need to look at if we want to change the way we work and we live day to day in our lives. So the international response to this, in terms of what we've been involved with at Native Events, and I'll focus a lot, mainly on Europe. I'll give some examples of that. So we've been part of a group of festivals working together and united for a circular and climate neutral world. So this is called the Green Deal for Circular Festivals. And it's kind of this growing community of European frontrunners of sustainability. And it was signed back, this deal was signed back in 2019. 49 festivals are now part of it and 17 different countries. And by signing up to kind of participate in this, there was a real commitment from these festivals to try and test as much as possible all of these different things, which I'm going to talk a little bit about when I'm going through best practice, test all of these different things that we can do at events and festivals, what benefits they have, how they can reduce impacts, and learn from each other and try and leapfrog some of those learnings, because across Europe, it's a very different events industry in every country. There's different infrastructure available, there's different systems in place, there's different requirements from public bodies. So it's a real mixed bag, and there's so much learning opportunities from sharing your knowledge. And we've really seen this with the Green Deal for circular festivals. And just before I kind of move on to my next example, I just wanted to talk about the circular economy. I think it's a word and it's a phrase that's thrown around a lot. And just for anybody who might not be familiar with it, the circular economy essentially is based on 3 principles, which is designing out waste and pollution, keeping products and materials in use, and regenerating natural systems. So you can see here we have our biosphere and our technosphere. And we're taking from our biosphere, we're creating in our technosphere, and we're using them, which isn't actually marked on this diagram, in our sociosphere, which is all those cultural pieces. And so it's really important that we design out waste and pollution from the get-go with everything from a product or a service, and that we make sure that all of those things are not creating waste, but also that they're keeping materials in use. And just to reframe this again, to just really concretely explain what it is, what we have been operating in is either a linear or recycling economy, where we take, make, use, and waste. And as we all know, waste isn't a thing, it still exists. And then with the recycling economy, we're taking some of that materials that we've used and we're trying to recycle them. But it's important to note that even just on a plastic front, for example, only 9% of plastic worldwide has ever been recycled. So that other 91% is floating around, and it's not going to be used for anything, and it'll probably exist long after, I should say, we are here. And recycling, as well, we really need to think about it from a downcycling and an upcycling point of view. And this is why the circular economy is really important, because, something might be recyclable, but what it's actually being recycled into might be a very, very low value item that will eventually end up as waste. And that's why this is not the ideal model to work with. And it's important to note that, recycling has a really important place, but recycling only has an important place when it's the piece at the end, when we've got most of our materials in reuse or regenerating our natural systems, then we can have things that are recycled at a very high value. So as I said, the circular economy is all about keeping things in the loop, and preventing waste and designing out pollution as much as possible. So as I said, the Circular Festivals has been really incredible in learning about circular economy practices at events. I'm going to touch on this a little bit more through some of the examples I will give. This is another example I'm sure that everyone has heard about, which is the Music of Spheres World Tour from Coldplay. And I just wanted to include this because you can go onto their website and you can really learn a lot about what they're doing. Some really, really incredible work is going into this from some of our partners, including Zap Power and Hope Solutions, in terms of looking at the carbon emissions, putting in renewables, building new batteries for the entire show. But something I wanted to touch on was when we were with them in Croke Park, it was really, really important to them that their policy was understood by the promoter and that the communications around what they were doing were really, really clear. And there was a big sense that they were really pushing for everybody on the team, not just a sustainability person, not just one part of the promotion team, but everybody on the ground needed to understand what needed to be done as part of their show. So they had a very clear policy on waste management, for example. They had a really clear policy on communicating transport, for example, where you had to mention the public transport before you mentioned the car parking, for example. So there's a lot of work gone into this, and I would highly recommend people checking it out afterwards. And so to talk a little bit about Ireland's response, which I really want to do, and which is our focus, as I said, here at Native Events for the most part, I'm going to kind of talk about, I suppose, what we're seeing and hearing in the Irish events industry at the moment in relation to sustainability. Events and festivals are included in Ireland's circular economy strategy and plan, particularly in the National Waste Management Plan. So it is something that is trickling down, from a European and a global perspective in terms of the UN, where cultural experiences and outlets are very much being seen to be important actors in climate action. And events and festivals are mentioned in here in relation to reusables and waste prevention. So it's kind of getting to that time now where we will start to see sustainability requirements likely coming in. Arts Council, for example. So what we're seeing now and hearing, as I mentioned, is the Arts Council now requires sustainability policies from their funded organisations. We're also starting to see local authorities looking at how to support the greening of festivals, which is really, really amazing. We're seeing an increase in the availability of renewables and an increased demand. Ireland has lots of specific guides. I'm going to talk through all of these pieces. Organisers are demanding sustainable practice and infrastructure from their suppliers, which is incredible because that is pushing the industry and the suppliers in the right direction. And on the other side of this, we're kind of seeing a lack of a joined-up approach for waste prevention. And there's definitely still a little bit of a, frightened approach to waste management where people don't want to change. They kind of want to continue on the same path. We're also kind of seeing, not the best efficiency around power at events. And there's kind of upskilling needed in these areas in terms of advancing. Lack of innovation around wastewater is something that we see a lot in Ireland, and this is directly related, I suppose, to the actual national wastewater infrastructure that we have. And then also there's a bit of a slow uptake on reusables, really. I was hoping, I think when I started out years ago in sustainable event management, that we would be further along, but we are seeing good progress there, and we're certainly seeing a lot more uptake in sporting events. Audiences as well are really increasingly demanding sustainability, and we're seeing this more and more. So I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the work we've done pushing the industry in the right direction, our contribution, I suppose, and following our mission, which is to transform the industry. So I mentioned the Arts Council, and it's kind of just to give you a sense of the work that went into this. I suppose this was in conjunction with Jews Bicycle Europe. It was a very big consultation. It was a very long process to create the policy and make sure that it was approved by everybody involved. There's a climate action webpage, which you can look at all about how the Arts Council is approaching this. We did a carbon footprint for the organisation, and we also kind of set up these sector initiatives. So what's expected now, I suppose, from funded organisations in 2025 is to kind of provide a broad statement on their environmental commitment, their policy, so the do's and don'ts of what they will and won't do in relation to sustainability and climate action. And what's nice about this, I suppose, as a starting point is that, every event and festival is so different, and events and festivals are really complex, and anybody who's worked in them knows that. So when it comes to a policy, there could be one kind of framework, there can be templates, but at the end of the day, it is up to the organisation to understand what the do's and don'ts are in relation to what their activities are. So there is no framework. And for this starting point, they're very much requiring people to submit it, and they're going to have a look at them, I suppose, with this open kind of view of them. The implementation plan then involves, what your actions you're taking, specific targets, and how you're communicating it. And again, these are starting points for a lot of organisations. I can give an example of some organisations that we worked with on this later on in the slides, and some of the challenges they face as well in kind of pulling this together. But to support this, and what's really important about requirements coming in, and something that we always advocate for at Native Events, and this will be going beyond the Arts Council as well, for when more requirements come in, let's say from a licensing perspective, as I hope it will in the future to push people in the right direction, you do need to support festivals and events with the information as well. So as part of this specific project from the Arts Council, there is a series of online training sessions. We did online peer-to-peer exchanges and a guide as well. And these are all available on the Arts Council website if you look up sustainability resources. And it's specific to festivals as well. There's also one specific to venue-based organisations, which is really helpful if you're running conference events or meetings and things like that. And all of this was informed by quite a lot of consultation as well, to make sure that it was fit for purpose, to make sure that it did actually respond to the skills gaps, to the activities that people are undertaking. And we really wanted to make it kind of meaningful and impactful, so that people could take it away and actually apply it to what the request and the requirement was. One of the other projects that we worked on was the elimination of single-use plastic projects with the regional waste management planning offices. That is a mouthful to say. I think they are now changing to the regional waste offices to make it less of one. But this kind of project ended up with this guide to plastic-free festivals and events. But the project itself, again, was really important for doing that research and supporting the industry and helping people to understand, what is actually involved in eliminating single-use plastics. What are the challenges? It involved industry stakeholder online roundtables. We had one at the beginning and one at the end with key stakeholders in the industry, everyone from festival organizers to the actual suppliers. And we actually did 4 pilots on 4 different festivals on which we reported the carbon emissions, but also the organizational elements of introducing reusables specifically. And that kind of led to this development of the guide. So these are some of the photos from that. And it's just kind of to highlight here that, bringing in reusables and changing things at events, changing systems, bringing in new things, it's really challenging. And so much of it was communications, getting people on board, getting the buy-in, and helping people to understand why we're doing it in the first place and making sure that they really get where it fits into their specific role. Because a lot of the time there is slight additions to people's roles, but at the same time, it's changing the way they're working a little bit. And when you're introducing anything for the first time, you need to achieve that buy-in. You need to do that little bit of hand-holding to get people to actually, make sure they're integrating into their workload. And some of the results that came out of this and the key findings, which was really great from a myth-busting, I suppose, perspective, was, a lot of people were like, oh, what about the washing for reusable cups? We got that so often, and what we found when we actually did the carbon footprints was that washing was the lowest carbon impact of each event. Like, we are at a point in time now where technology has moved on, and I can certainly say that in terms of washing and dishwashers, that is also true. And so this was a super efficient part of it, the washing of the actual cups. And all of the pilots we did saved on carbon from switching to reusables in a once-off capacity. They didn't save on it by much because it was only that once-off kind of introduction. But what we did was we calculated it over a number of different uses. And if you did it multiple times, you were projected to save absolutely massive tons of carbon. But the most important thing that we learned from this was the manufacturing and the losses are the highest carbon impact. Again, it's going back to those embedded carbon footprints within the materials that we have in our world. And that's why the circular economy is so, so important for keeping materials in use. And I'll touch on that a little bit when I have a look at the carbon emissions associated with festivals and events. But to give you a sense of what that guide looks at, and I've got these linked at the end in the resources as well, it gives you a full roadmap in terms of how to introduce reusable cups to your event. It also specifies across different types of event. If you've got a multi-venue, one day it looks at the financial side of it as well, which is a really, really key challenge for any event festival. How are you actually going to finance this or put in a system financially that works? And then there's also an opportunity to measure your impact as well. So it's definitely worth a look at if this is something you're interested in or something that you're getting ready to do in the future. One of the other ways that we're contributing to the events and festival industry in Ireland is working with the Laois County Council. So as I said, county councils are definitely springing up more, trying to support smaller kind of voluntary run festivals, of which there are thousands across the country and have touch points with millions of people, which is incredible. So these events cannot be undervalued in terms of their sustainability and their impact on society as well. And the vision for this really was to kind of provide sustainable infrastructure for those events and trainings to go along with them. So starting off with waste management and renewables was kind of our inspiration and vision for this. We felt that these were kind of key areas that we could focus on, that we would hope to get traction from, I suppose, with event organizers. And what we ended up doing was creating, as I said, that training materials that we needed to create. We worked with the County Council on the provision of batteries that would be easy to use for event organisers, for small shows, for different installations. And then these on the right here, which are kind of bin signage, which goes onto the actual bin itself. So this is just a picture of that in progress. And this project is continuing and developing, and we're hoping to spread it out into other impact areas as well in the future. I kind of mentioned festivals working together from an Arts Council perspective. So the Naturally Wild Festivals was a consortium of a number of different festivals, these ones here, which some of you will be familiar with. And what we ended up doing was building out a specific carbon kind of tracking sheet for them. They were very much ahead of the requirements from the Arts Council. They wanted to understand their impact so that they could inform their sustainability policies and their implementation plans. And it's a challenge really for festivals and events, because as I said, they're so complex and they're also different. And so when it comes to carbon accounting, it can be quite a challenge, and often you kind of need to build out your own way of doing it. But there are a number of tools that can help you to get started before getting into such granular information, I suppose. So I'll kind of keep pressing on here because I'm conscious of me having a lot to say and a lot on this subject, and kind of wanting to get through as much as possible and give some time for questions at the end. And I would encourage you guys to just, I suppose, ask any questions as you go, or even jot down any notes as you go, and we can have a little discussion when we come to that point. But to talk a little bit about the good practice, what does sustainable event management look like? So I've kind of mentioned communications. So much of sustainable event management is strong communications, because you need this for change management. You need this for negotiation. You need this for the betterment of the systems that you have in place. I've spoken to sustainability coordinators, production managers across Europe, and particularly those who've been in the industry for a long time. So many of them said it's like rubbing up, shoulders with the right people, annoying the sponsorship department, sitting next to them in the office. So much of it is communications when you're trying to change systems, change mindsets, and kind of, have this on people's minds as much as possible. Sustainability cannot be a nice to have. It needs to be part of our decision making and how we run our events. Also outside of communications, of course, it's careful resource management, thinking about the circular economy. It's reducing the negative impacts and the emissions at festivals. It's enhancing the social and cultural sphere of what we do, and it's leading by example, understanding that influence, as I mentioned. So the next piece that I'm going to talk about is the carbon side of things. And it's just to start off with this, because again, I'm not sure what understanding everybody has on this webinar today. So it's good to just touch on the 3 scopes of carbon when we're looking at carbon measurement. So we have scope 1, which are direct emissions from what we're doing and our activities. And then we have scope 2 and 3, which are indirect. And I've kind of just framed these within events and festivals for everybody today. So with scope 1, it's kind of looking at the direct burning of fossil fuels for anything that you're doing in your activities. So we're looking at the on-site travel of your own vehicles, and then your on-site power from fuel. So if you've got generators, for example, that would be direct emissions, and they're more within your control than your indirect emissions. Scope 2 is that purchased electricity. So that's the indirect burning of fossil fuels. So that would be the purchased electricity within your company facilities. Maybe you've got offices on site that are connected to the grid. So it's getting a handle on those and understanding what the impact is there. And then scope 3 is kind of everything else, which is a lot. And I do want to highlight here, while scope 3 are indirect and sometimes positioned as more out of your control than scope 1 and 2, there is actually a lot that you can do in this area. So within scope 3, you've got your materials, so that's waste and resources, travel, so that's audience, crew, contractors, artists, the list goes on, transport of site infrastructure and production materials, and those purchased goods and services that we have on site. So that's like food, merch, tickets, anything that's physical that's coming on site as well. So to frame this within events and to kind of give a sense of where all those emissions are coming from, I really like this study from A Greener Future. You can kind of see from this study very clearly that scope 3 is where the largest quantity of the emissions live. And what was interesting about this study in particular was that for a long time, because a lot of people weren't measuring their carbon, it was very hard to kind of see all of the smaller scope 3 pieces because they're harder to measure. And what people often kind of looked at was, okay, well, it's transport. But actually, when you break it down, yes, very much audience transport is 41%, but also you're looking at food and beverage, you're looking at production and third-party transport, you're looking at waste and water and sewage as well. So you can see that at 3.8% there. So it's very important that we kind of understand where the emissions are coming from so that we can really strategically, I suppose, look to reduce them. And to really kind of frame this a little bit and to give a bit of a perspective shift, because just going back to this other slide, energy use here is a lot smaller, as you can see. But when you reframe it within the perspective of the on-site emissions, so that was everything at your event, everything, all of the things involved in it. But when you actually come to your on-site emissions, 76% of that comes from energy alone. And so it's important to understand what is within your control of changing, like your energy systems and your waste prevention, for example, and what is less within your control and where you can have influence. Again, reframing within that sphere of influence. So I'm going to quickly kind of run through the different impact areas of events, and that's how we generally break down sustainability at events. Native events is by breaking it into those impact areas, giving some examples of approaches and mindsets towards it, and some key case studies as well. So I'm going to kick off on that note with energy, 76% of on-site emissions. So I'm going to look at where energy comes from at events, and again, this is kind of framed within outdoor events and festivals, but of course we also are connected to the grid a lot of the time in our venues. But the pros and cons really is that, what we mostly have at festivals is generators. They're available, they're the norm, and they're efficient when they're run at the right capacity. But the cons really would be the emissions, the direct emissions that are coming out of them, the use of fossil fuels, of course, and then the inefficient use, because a lot of the time what we see is there's baseline fuel usage when they're not run at the right capacity. So you're spending money, you're burning fossil fuels, and you're actually emitting direct emissions on site into the atmosphere. Then there's biofuel. So this is really common in Ireland at the moment. Biofuel is widely available. It has a 90% emissions reduction on site. It's available, it's reliable, it's usable within existing generators, which is all really, really positive as we look to change and reduce our emissions. But one of the issues with biofuel probably would be the sourcing and the land use. So you have to be really careful with procurement that you're not getting this from a place that's actually deteriorating lands in other places. The ideal thing would be to be using waste vegetable oil where possible. So you need to really look at this if you're planning to use biofuel. And then, of course, there's renewables. And as we know, we need to move in this direction. They're zero emissions, they're reliable, they're clean, but there's an upskill needed. It's still very new on lots of fronts, and particularly in a temporary capacity at a festival and event. People need to understand what they're doing, how to use them. And generally, in terms of using renewables, you really need to understand what you're powering. So there needs to be a very, very good understanding of the actual power that's being drawn. And this is something that's not really practiced as much in events at the moment. We like to go with the energy hierarchy. And if you're not familiar with it, it's kind of, similar to the waste hierarchy in lots of ways, preventing where possible. So designing your site layout in a specific way so that, okay, I don't actually need to put that generator over in that car park, being more efficient and understanding what power you're actually using, sourcing, I suppose, renewables as much as possible, trying to do hybrid systems. There's possibilities where you can connect up solar with batteries and batteries as generators, so that when the generator gets to a certain point, you're not using that baseline fuel and you can kick in a battery which is able to hold the load. And of course, then at the very bottom, we have the alternative fuels, because sourcing is a little bit iffy, and then diesel fuel generators only. So we're trying to move away from these things, and this is the kind of perspective and framework that we would use. Moving into materials then, this is a not so widely shown picture, but one that's very familiar to anybody who's worked at a camping festival, particularly large scale ones. Materials and waste prevention is a big perspective shift that's needed on a lot of festivals. There's still kind of a little bit of a, not wanting to change the usual system of just kind of getting somebody in to clean it all up. And what we really need to do is look at the waste hierarchy as an opportunity for change. So preventing, materials through procurement, talking to all the people that are bringing things onto site, like traders, sponsors, and all of the signage that's involved, and all the infrastructure, minimizing this as much as possible and reusing what we have. And reuse is always an opportunity for creativity as well. Something to kind of think about is like, where does waste go? The best case scenario is waste recovery and recycling facilities, and recycling isn't always very efficient, and there's such a multitude of materials out there that it's very hard to know what is and isn't recyclable. Composting and anaerobic digestion, this is a photo from a composting site. It's complicated with events when you bring in compostables because of the sheer amount of them that go into this. It can really degrade soil quality. The least kind of worst scenario then would be incineration and waste to energy with music festivals, we see tents going to incineration for the most part. They burn really hot because of their high calorific value. So the incinerators like them, but the atmosphere certainly does not. And then their worst case scenario is landfill. And up until very recently, I was kind of, I was speaking with different waste contractors, and I was under the impression that there really wasn't many landfills in use in Ireland, but apparently a lot of hard plastics are ending up in landfill. So we want to avoid this as much as possible. And the waste hierarchy is a really important way to do that kind of perspective shift on waste in general, eliminating it as part of your design. And some of the examples I can give here, just on the left there, we've got the Ocean Hero Awards. We worked with a company called Forger Bricks, which was fantastic, to take plastic and turn it into these beautiful awards. And what you can see in the background there as well is the decor that we did for the event, which was upcycled plastic. A lot of the groups that were at these awards were community groups who had spent time on beaches, who were cleaning up as much as possible. And it was great to kind of tie that in with the event. And then we also have on the right here, Smart Waste, which is the service that we offer at Native Events, where we kind of rethink waste management from a prevention perspective. So what we're trying to do is make it more of an engaging piece for the audience as well. You can see there on the very right that one of our team is wearing a jumpsuit, and that jumpsuit is actually made out of waste tents. So this was just a result of Body and Soul Festival back in 2023, which was our cleanest festival to date, where we started implementing some of our smart waste planning. I'm conscious of time because I could talk forever. So I'll move through these as fast as I can so that we can have some time for questions. But we have water as well, and you'll know kind of the general, I suppose, objectives that you can look at for water in terms of refill stations and push taps and things like this. But what we've been trying to do, I suppose, at Native is push the industry in the right direction. We brought compost toilets to Body and Soul. These are the ones that are used at Glastonbury. So there's no water used in these. There's no tankers needed. There's no chemicals used. And what you can really do is kind of start to look at including this in your policy, banning certain chemicals, do's and don'ts with cleaning products, and kind of making a water conservation plan. And then we have food and beverage as well, of course, which is a really important area to look at. We need to establish those kind of minimum sourcing standards and trader procurement guidelines. We need to try and tie this in with materials management, reducing avoidable food waste, and looking at the impact of food globally as well, trying to reduce meat and dairy consumption on site. So these are some of the things that we've done. And on the left here, some on-site composting, which is a great communications piece as well for an initiative on site with people. And then on the right here, we have an image from Digital Festival in the Netherlands, where they had a recycle hub where they also did on-site composting. And it goes kind of beyond then, the immediate taking something and actually turning it into a valuable resource, but actually an education piece for the audience. And we found that the attendees were really, really engaged with this at Body and Soul Festival and at Digital. And Digital Festival are the first circular festival in the world. They've done some incredible work. And, one thing that they've done with food is actually create a circular food court. So this was back in 2018, and they actually challenged their food traders to only use surplus food from local restaurants, which is an amazing initiative. An amazing programming to have an event as well, and really interesting and really amazing food came out of it. And there's an organization in Ireland called Food Cloud that we work with, and they are doing some similar stuff. They actually have a food truck available for events where we make it all from food waste, essentially. Travel and transport is a very big area that we also need to focus on, and how we try and, I suppose, highlight the issues around transport. I can show you this carbon footprint from a festival that we worked with, and you can see here there was 2,000 journeys by air travel, and look at the carbon associated with it. You've got 2,600 tons of CO2, and then if you look at the bus, you've got 3,500 journeys and only 34 tons of CO2 associated with it. So this is just a bit of a perspective on the importance of getting people, I suppose, out of single occupancy cars and air travel and onto those local trains and buses when organizing events. And what I would kind of recommend is to look at choosing kind of local suppliers, bulk loading and timing around your load-in, really understanding your crew transport as much as possible, and trying to collect information on this so that you can make decisions based on actual information. And then there's nature and biodiversity, which is often forgotten and shouldn't be. A lot of Greenfield Festival sites don't do a biodiversity audit. It's something that we've done at Body and Soul previously. It can be really telling of the impact of your event or festival on the environment. And to do this, it's really key is a relationship with the landowner or venue. A lot of the time, Greenfield Festivals specifically are held on sites that are farms that might have woodland on them. So they do care about this. And if you work together, you can really assess it and try and figure out how to support it. Other initiatives that you can try and do is education. I like to add this photo in because it's quite funny. That's me on the right there with the former Minister for the Circular Economy, taking all of my chances to influence as much as possible, whereby I had a piece of cherry laurel. We essentially took cherry laurel and used it for our fire at Body and Soul a few years ago. And this is an invasive species that's destroying our native woodland, and it's for sale in gardens and garden centres and shops. So this was something that I wanted to highlight. So you can really do this through your programming as well and make it really directly related to your event and the local locality that you're in. So the key takeaways for sustainable event management for me today that I would like to just kind of share with everybody is governance is key. So creating a sustainability policy, the do's and don'ts, and you can do that now and you can start that now. And in tandem with that, you can look at your event impact and by impact areas. So start monitoring carbon emissions if you can. And if you don't have the tools necessarily to do that, what you can have a look at is the creative climate tools from Julie's Bicycle, which is linked in the resources. It's a really, really easy to use tool to get you started on actually measuring and understanding what data you need to collect to get a good picture on this. And then you can go back and revise that sustainability policy and that implementation plan so that it's matched with actual data so you know where you need to focus. It's very important to look beyond carbon on who and how you were influencing and those spheres of influence, as I mentioned, and communicate transparently. Every single organization who is doing anything on climate action is at a different part of this journey. And they very much have gone through similar things, have had similar problems, have had areas where they haven't been able to focus on as much. And it's really important to communicate what you are doing rather than being fearful of what you're doing wrong. And then making use of the resources available to you and the tools available to you. So very kind of quickly, the key tools that I would recommend for event organisers, and these can be used not just in Ireland, but they are specific to Ireland, I suppose, is the Sustainable Festivals Guidelines, which Native Events were fortunate enough to work with Fáilte Ireland on. These are an amazing set of tools where you kind of get to look at all of these impact areas, including governance, including communications, where you can kind of map out where you are in your journey and what the next steps are that you can take to improve. So it's a really, really handy resource that you can literally go on and you can tick box and see where you're at and kind of add up. And it has this kind of traffic light system to see whether or not you're making progress or you're leading the way in certain areas. So it's very handy as well from a sustainability policy development perspective. This is another project that we also got to work on with an Erasmus project. So this is the Future Festivals tool. This is really, really quick to use. It's essentially a survey. You can use it as a test. You can use it as a freelancer. You can use it as an organization or an event or festival specifically, going through a number of questions to see where you are at in terms of all of the different impact areas, as I mentioned. And what it does is it spits out a personalized report for you with resources on what you can do next, an overview of where you are with each impact area, and loads and loads of resources at the event specific to what you have entered into that survey again. So these two things, if you're not really sure where to start with your sustainability policy, I would recommend getting into these as much as possible and having a root around with them and a play around with them to see how it can kind of help you frame this in relation to your own work. And then finally, it's the sustainability toolkit for the creative and cultural industry. I just thought I'd mention this in case there's anybody else on the call outside of the events specific sector who might be in audiovisual industry or cultural heritage, performing arts, and visual arts. This is a really fantastic resource with absolutely tons on it in terms of how to take more action around climate and develop out those sustainability policies. And hopefully in there you can find things that are a little bit more relevant to you. So I'm going to stop there and kind of get back into the stop sharing so I can see the chat again and just see what's come up and do some questions. So thank you all for listening to this webinar. And I'm looking forward to hearing what you have to say. Just to note, I will share this because I have the resources as well linked on the last page. So there'll be a live link that you can click to have a look at this. And I believe it will also be available on Friday on YouTube.
Yes, it will. Áine, thank you so much. That was really, really interesting. And as we had kind of said beforehand, when it comes to sustainability, there really is so much to cover. So really appreciate you getting through so much there. I did have a couple of people message me privately asking if the slides will be available. So for anyone else wondering, yeah, as Áine said there, she'll be sending them on to me and I can send them out to everyone here who has been present. Yeah, that was really, really fantastic, really insightful. I think one image that really stuck out to me, Áine, was the tents being picked up at the end of a festival and talking about how they go into the incinerator and it burns at such a high temperature that it's so bad for the environment. And I can only imagine just how many tents are left behind at the end of a festival. I mean, I'm sure, especially in Ireland, when it might be a bit rainy that morning, people are hungover, people are tired. I do remember as well, there was like 1 or 2 years when festival organisers had said that any tents left behind would be donated to the homeless. And I feel like people have kind of leaned on that a little bit too much. And they're like, oh, whatever, it's fine. If I leave it, it'll get picked up. But it's mad to see the impact that actually has.
I think, like, again, it really goes back to communications. Like, you cannot underestimate how words have an effect. There was a festival in Ireland that said tents were recycled afterwards. They are not recycled afterwards. That is not true. And honestly, it was baffling to see that. It's kind of encouraging people in the wrong direction. Again, we need to understand our responsibility as influencers in culture and behaviors in spaces on how that's going to make people act, and how people often take information and then run with it, and they just think, oh, I've learned this once and that's how it is now. And they kind of, go with it. So it's really important that we look at our communications and transparently say, tents are really hard to deal with. Please work with us to take them home. They will not be able to be recycled. We will, as much as possible, try to salvage as much as possible, but that's not always possible. It's not possible a lot of the time with how they're left, or the rain, or even the time, because what happens is cleaning teams often come in really quickly. The bulldozers come in really quickly because, as you know, you've worked in events and festivals, you're trying to get the site pulled down as quickly as possible.
Yeah.
It's costly if you don't, So yeah, that's an important one. I don't know if there's any other questions in the chat. I just wanted to mention, and I'll put this in the chat for anybody who's still here. We have our webinar ourselves coming up, specifically diving into energy in more detail. And I'll share that on the resources page too, because, as you said, it's like very difficult to get into the real detail of everything. So if you're more interested in diving deeper into energy, that's something that we have coming up on February 26th. So you can register for that as well. And then I've also linked the presentation there in the chat for anybody who's still here and wants to have a look at it immediately. Thank you so much.
Actually, Mary, where she's asking, are there any accredited courses for people who'd be interested in becoming sustainability event management ambassadors?
So I suppose there are some international courses that are accredited for sustainable event management, but I suppose something that we are working on at Native Events, and what I'm personally working on at the moment, is the development of a sustainable event management course directly specific to Irish events industry. So that is something to keep an eye out on Native Events website for. So I'm really glad you asked. The topic of accreditation is always something that I find interesting. It's an ever-changing landscape with sustainability. So accreditation is something that I'm looking into at the moment for this course. And it will all depend on how in-depth the course gets, you know what I mean? So you can become a generalist across sustainability in events and festivals, but if you need to deep dive into specific areas of renewables and things like that, there are other courses that you need to go and do. But this is certainly something that we're looking into. So I would encourage you to keep an eye on Native Events for our upcoming course, which will likely launch towards the end of this year or early in 2026.
Fair, that makes sense. Actually, I think there might be a question over this side, is there? Oh yeah. What are some measures an event company can take to improve while working on events where we don't have the desired level of influence on a client that we would like to? Question from Connor there.
Yeah, like I think there's so much. Well, first of all, I suppose for you personally, it needs to be quite embedded that you want to do this. Okay, so you've got a client that's not necessarily interested in sustainability. Are you going to say, okay, well then I can't be interested in it for this job, or are you going to say, I am going to continue, having this as part of my practice, as my work, and as my profession? So I think it's from the get-go when you're working with those clients, just communicating how important climate action is to you, and communicating as best you can about the influence that events and festivals have, and then being really proactive with suggestions that you can make on how they can improve the systems that they have in place. Like maybe it's a sponsor you're dealing with, maybe you can just query things. A lot of the time it's about asking questions and having conversations and piquing people's interests. Something that's really nice to do as well is to work with people or bring people into the conversation who are kind of already backing that up a little bit, because people don't like to jump in and take risks a lot of the time and be the first person to do this. So there's often this really nice thing you can do where you can say, well, we've worked with these people before and they adopted this and that really helped them. So as much as possible, you're trying to, with the clients you do have that are interested, try and make some changes, try and document that and use that in your negotiation with clients who are less interested, because they'll be like, oh, well, if you've done this before and it's worked, or, oh, if this company's done it, then I want to do it. Try and build out that competitive advantage.
Yeah, I suppose, as you said, if they're worried that they're like the first people trying it, they might be concerned. Do you think it could also be a thing that they're worried it would end up costing them more if they go down that route?
Yeah, I think so. Like, there's so many different things you can do with sustainability. Like you could invest massively in putting in a grid connection on a festival site. You could invest massively in changing towards a different system entirely in some way, shape or form, right? But a lot of the time it's small changes as well. And it's doing the research and understanding what the costs are going to be and what the benefits are going to be. It's actually a really big area that's I struggle with, because there's very little cost benefit analysis done around sustainability, and it is upsetting that we have to try and push so often for funding around sustainability when we have the largest global challenge of humanity's time kind of looming. Like it's fascinating that you have to do that, but I'm aware that in business you do. So you have to do your research and you have to make a case and be confident with it and work with the right people who can support you.
Absolutely. Okay, well, I don't think we have any more questions coming in. And I know, Áine, you were absolutely up the walls yourself today. So thank you so much for your time. And thank you for talking to us. And thanks, everyone, for joining us today. As we said, I will have this up on our YouTube on Friday. So if you want to catch up on anything again there, you can watch it on that. And also the slides are available here in the chat, and I'll send them out in emails also. So amazing. Thanks a million, Áine. Enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you, Chrissy. Talk to you later. Bye, everybody. Thanks so much.